Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I welcome the announcement which the Chancellor has made today about the growth figures. And I know that in Northern Ireland and my own constituency, as a result of the increased growth over the last year, there's been a 19% fall in unemployment, and of course that means that 550 individuals are now earning money who weren't earning money this time last year, and that's to be welcomed. Because I don't want to take a partisan view of this budget. Fortunately, we do not in Northern Ireland have to be involved in the competition between the parties opposite and the opposition party here. However, I do want to look objectively at what has been said in the budget today. And the first concern that I want to look at is the whole issue of growth. First of all, the figures which the Chancellor has given us. And don't forget, we have had revisions about growth time and time again. And one has to ask, even with the imprimatur of the Office of Budget Responsibility, if we look at what this growth is predicated on, then we've got to ask, is it sustainable? Because up until now, growth has been determined by consumer expenditure. Consumer expenditure, according to the figures that we're being given in the budget, is not going to jump all that dramatically. But we're going to see, compared to the last 2 years, a 48 times jump in private investment. We're going to see a 3 times jump in exports. Now, if with all of the measures that the government has taken over the last number of years, the reduction of corporation tax, the enhanced capital allowances that were announced last year, and all of the other measures taken to improve investment, as well as those measures taken to improve exports, if they didn't work in the last 2 years, how and on what basis is the Chancellor basing his massive jump in private investment and exports to sustain the growth which he is predicting for the next year? And I will give way, yes.
Point. I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point, but the decision to make investment from a businessman's standpoint comes from business confidence. And when there's more growth, businesses feel confident to invest in their businesses, which in turn create jobs and growth again.
I can accept that point, except we've heard, and I've heard from the benches opposite, for the last 3 years, that business is now more confident, that they've got a firm hand on the helm. And yet we haven't seen that coming through in the figures to date. So that's the first concern that I have. I want to see growth sustained. I actually want the Chancellor to succeed. It doesn't matter to me electorally whether he succeeds or whether he fails or not, but it does matter to my constituents. It does matter to my constituents whether he succeeds. The second point I want to make, because I just want to move on to this point, is the whole question about the distribution of that growth. Because a lot, I'm going to finish that point. That growth has been mostly predicated with growth in the southeast of England. Yes. Regions have not, and regions like Northern Ireland, where there's been 0.3% growth, have not benefited from it. I will give way to the honourable member.
I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman, because he picked up on the point that I was going to raise there, which is about the unevenness of growth across the UK and the fact that in Northern Ireland we have a relatively low level of growth, which is impact in terms of jobs and investment. So I'd be grateful to the honourable gentleman with his expertise and experience in Northern Ireland finances, indicating what more the government could do to help regions like Northern Ireland.
Well, I listened intensely, and indeed I was pleased when the Chancellor actually made the point in his speech that he wanted to ensure that growth affected all of the regions of the United Kingdom. But I was singularly disappointed then to listen to the rest of the speech to see how and what policies were actually going to be introduced to affect that more even distribution of growth. Because all of the policies, and I suppose the one, and I do welcome it, was the setting up the enterprise zone in Coleraine. But of course, one has to bear in mind that that is to balance out the 350 jobs lost in that town, where there has already been severe unemployment caused by the closure of some companies. It was to replace those particular jobs and to try and balance the impact that a decision by central government had on constituents in Northern Ireland. I'll give way, but keep it brief because
I'd just like to correct the record that the forecast is only for 4.7% increase in exports next year and 8% increase in investment, and I think those are achievable.
The percentage growth last year was 0.8%. The percentage growth next year is 2.6%. Now, by any calculation, that's a 3 times increase. In fact, more than a 3 times increase in the rate of growth of exports. And yet, I know that the government has talked about finance and the reduction in the cost of that finance for people who are exporting, but measures have already been introduced in previous years and did not have the effect. And of course, it's against a situation where the pound is actually strengthening at the moment as well. So there's going to be a difficulty there. So that's the first issue that I want to raise. On what basis is this optimism made? And if it is export and investment-led growth, then past patterns don't show it. The second issue I want to make is the second point I want to make is this: that the Chancellor talked about and it was a throwaway line, that I am not in the job of easing up just because things are getting better, and we don't want to spend more. I'm not asking the government to spend more. I'm asking the government to spend differently, to spend better. Of course, we've got to get the deficit under control. But what is the increase in that deficit at the moment? The percentage of our GDP, which is made up of debt, what is most of it made up of? Most of it is made up on paying people to sit on their backsides to do nothing.
Wasting time.
Instead of investment in infrastructure projects which would have a return, which would put people back to work, which would increase tax revenues, which would stimulate growth. And I look at some of the infrastructure projects in Northern Ireland, in tourism, where for modest amounts of money, with the Titanic Signature project, we're now bringing in millions of pounds every year and 500,000 visitors, most of them from outside the state. The extension of the gas pipeline, many people have talked today about the cost of living. One of the ways of bringing fuel prices down is to give people alternative choices when it comes to fuel. And for modest public investment, we have been able to increase the coverage of gas pipelines in Northern Ireland, bringing cheaper fuel to people, helping to bring their cost of living down. And I don't really have too much time, otherwise I would be happy to give way. And of course, when it comes to industry, the help given to industry has in research and development for increasing their machinery, etc. I welcome the increase in capital allowances. In fact, one of the things which we suggested was if corporation tax could not be devolved to Northern Ireland, then at least one of the things that ought to be done was to increase capital allowances, to increase the ability for companies to invest via that particular mechanism. But all of those stimulate growth, and in turn will add to the productive potential of the economy. That's not spending more, that's spending differently. And I make the point again that if we're finding it difficult to get private investment in the economy, then you pump prime it by public investment. And that public investment, I believe, can have an important impact. Let me just come to some of the specifics then, and I welcome some of the specific spending proposals, the extra spending on infrastructure, on potholes, etc. All of that has borne consequences. I just hope that the government, in spending money to fill in potholes, in a couple of years' time is not going to have to look for money to fill the financial holes that there are in this budget, and which I believe there are in this particular budget. I also welcome the changes, especially for pensioners and saving. I mean, saving is important. And whilst this will not impact on all pensioners, because there are many of my constituents who are pensioners who have never been earning enough in their lives to accumulate. huge savings. But nevertheless, for those who have saved, they should be able to experience the reward of their savings. Let me just finish up with one last point. And Chancellor has made a lot of issue about the help for major industries with energy costs. It is one thing to make temporary changes and give temporary help for those big energy users. It's another thing to continue with the mad policy of increasing reliability on renewables, which have pushed up energy bills, and which, once these temporary measures are over, firms are still going to have to face. And I think that this country is going to have to look at its energy policy. I welcome the fact that he wants to improve the extraction of oil from the North Sea, despite what the member in front of me has said, to fracked gas, which is a natural resource, which again will give us cheap energy. But if we are going to stick to a policy of dear energy, then we'll pay the consequences for it.
Andrew Mitchell.
Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Antrim, who speaks with such passion for his constituents.